Dan, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so happy to have you as my very special guest.
Thanks, Dan. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Dan, it's been a joy to get to watch your career unfold. We have your sister as a family friend of ours of more than 30 years. And so I've gotten to watch you kind of from afar, but not really, because in 2008, I was also living in New York City when I saw your face on TV in New York doing the Sprint commercials when you became the CEO. And so I have always admired your work and career. And so I'm just honored as someone that I really look up to as an innovator in this space, and obviously in telecom, but also in customer service, which is something I've been really focused on in my career. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with me.
My pleasure.
So let's go back and talk a little bit about your story and your journey for our listeners that might not know. The commercials I'm referencing were quite popular in 2008 when you became the face for Sprint as their CEO. And I thought that was really cool and would love to dive into that a little bit more. But first, tell
Sure.
me about the journey to get to that point in your career and a little bit more about your story.
Well, I've always been in the telecom industry. So when I got out of school, I started at AT&T. I had a tremendous 23 years there, had 14 assignments, worked all over the world. I had a chance at the beginning, actually, was on I have a podcast as well, and I interviewed a fellow who wrote this tremendous book on Bell Labs. And I got a chance to work with Bell Laboratories and really learn to innovate and apply technology in a way that would be useful to customers, and that was very much a hallmark of kind of my career. My last job at AT&T, I was the CEO at AT&T Wireless, which at the time was the largest wireless carrier in the U.S. And I retired from AT&T in 2000, then went and did a startup, worked for another company, and then I ended up at Sprint, as you mentioned. I came in right around the Christmas holidays of 2007. And the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. As a matter of fact, my very first day on the job, of course, the board didn't tell me just how bad things were because they were afraid I wouldn't have taken the job, and they were correct. I would not have if I knew it was that serious. But the business plan had the company filing for bankruptcy in 6 months, and I had to do something to try to turn that around. And you talk about the TV commercials. They started in early 2008. We launched something that was very radical and innovative in the industry at the time, which was called Simply Everything, because you might remember in 2007, about a year before that, Apple had introduced the iPhone, of course, which Sprint didn't have. Only AT&T had. Verizon didn't have it. T-Mobile didn't have it. Sprint didn't have it. And we needed to compete and do something even simpler than the iPhone. And we came out with Simply Everything because at the time, you might recall data was new. And so if you got your bill from AT&T or from anybody, you had your data charges, you had your text charges, you had your voice charges. It was very complex and quite expensive. So we came out with a plan that for a flat rate per month, that's what your rate was, no matter what you did. Surf to your heart's content, text to your heart's content, call to your heart's content. It's going to be the same price. And that was a radical innovation. That's what I was introducing on television. I did actually 10 commercials over the period of 4 years. And then I hired a new chief marketing officer, and part of getting him to come was he said, look, I love your ads, Dan, but I'm not going to leave where I am and move to Kansas City just to keep doing the same thing. I want to do something different. It's totally up to you. And I said, I'd really like to have you as my CMO. You come here and do whatever you want and take me off the air if that's what you'd like to do. And that's what he did. And that's when I stopped doing ads.
That's pretty amazing. And what a great lesson. I worked in the government sector too, and I think that's one of my biggest complaints is doing it the way it's always been done. And so how cool that you saw that opportunity, made a huge innovation and really became kind of the face of that brand, and then let someone come in and take you in a totally different direction as well and put that trust in someone else. So I love that.
Well, I didn't want to be the face of the brand. The ad agency talked me into it
Really?
because so when I first came to Sprint and communicated with the employees, there's a big auditorium at corporate headquarters in Overland Park, Kansas. And I would just have these dialogues with the employees. And one of the employees in the very first meeting said, Dan, what do you think of Sprint's advertising? And I said, I actually don't think much of it because there's not a clear brand position for the company. I said, look, AT&T, we have the iPhone and no one else does. Pretty
Mm,
straightforward. Verizon, can you hear me now? We have the best network. T-Mobile, low price. We're the price leader. Sprint, what is it? I looked around and asked people what, and nobody really knew what was the reason to come to Sprint. So I said, I don't like the advertising. The ad agency, I didn't realize this, but they also watched, like the rest of the country. This was live cast to all our locations across the country. The ad agency did as well, and they watched me and they go, "Uh-oh, we know, we're in trouble with respect to our advertising." And so they came to see me right away, and I told them, I said, "Look, you have 1 week because I don't want to train a brand new ad agency, but I'll give you 1 week to come back with a really good campaign, storyboards." And I knew quite a bit about advertising because my previous roles and how it worked. And they came back a week later and they came back with the storyboards and they had me, walking down the streets of New York and me delivering the message, had me in the ads. And I said to them, look, sucking up to the boss, it's not going to work with me. I have no interest in being in the ads. That's not how you're going to keep the job. And to which they responded, we got your messages through a tube. We watched you on television. We think you'll come across on television. So I asked him, I said, well, how many CEO ads, what percentage of them are successful? They said 1 in 7. 6 and 7 are disasters, but the ones that are successful are a grand slam. So it's either a strikeout or it's a grand slam. And a lot of the ads that have been run over the years, you don't remember them because and that's what we'll do here. If they don't test well right off the bat, we'll take them off the air and we'll go to something else. But we would think it's worth a shot. And to make a long story short, the ads worked extremely well because what happens is it lends a level of authenticity to the
mhm.
brand and the message when the people who are watching it know it's the CEO of the company or somebody from the company. It's not some actor or some spokesperson. It's really someone from the company. And in this case, speaking my own words in each ad, I made sure they were my own words. They would suggest my advertising team and the agency, this is kind of the message. And then I would rewrite it the way I would say it because I didn't read anything. There was no reading, there were no cue cards. I just walked down the street and said it the way I would say it. So it came across, I think, more authentically. And as a result, they worked. But yeah, it was not my objective to be the face of the brand, but I was stuck being that. And my security guys hated it because I was recognized everywhere and people
Everywhere.
would come up and take selfies no matter where I was. And of course, I enjoyed it, but my security guys didn't enjoy it very much.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And I love this idea about the authentic message being communicated from you at the top, because this was your radical, innovative idea about how you were going to transform this industry. Not just that company, but you were speaking to everyone, and not just a Sprint customer, but I know you were speaking to me personally and so many others. And that's what I'm always talking about in the work that we do is, get as close to the source as you can. And I've tried to do that in my work as much as possible. And so I think it's a perfect example of how, when, like you said, you were using your words, it wasn't something that was scripted and it was timely. You came in with an idea of you had a 6 month window to save this company and 1 week for your advertising agency to help you to do that. And you did it. And then you transformed the whole industry. It wasn't just Sprint, but these ideas that you brought, which is something I think a lot about in the work I did, even in the city space, was I always wanted it to be replicated. I was always hoping that other cities would do a digital state of the city address and take their mayor and, put them on camera instead of behind a podium. And I was always thinking about how the work that I could do could be shared across an industry. And you really did that. You transformed how I think about paying by minute or roaming charges or all of those things. And so talk to me about that. And I know there was an idea written on a napkin. I love this story too, that you had initially and something, a monthly rate and whatever that was. And then how that idea not only transformed and brought back a company on the brink, but spread to all of your competitors and transformed this whole industry.
Well, it really happened earlier in the wireless world, and actually goes back to my earlier days at AT&T. One of the things
Yeah.
I learned was that customers crave simplicity, and they'll pay a premium because this is about a company and how it makes money. You can charge more if you just make it really simple. If you don't nickel and dime,
Mm.
if it's, like, for example, if returns are easy, if the service is good, you just make their lives simple. That's really what they want. And I launched the internet division years ago at AT&T. I was called by the CEO at the time. I was actually in Europe, and he goes, "I want to bring you back to the States. This is like 1995. There's this debate going on, the internet. Should we be in the internet business? Should we not be in the internet business? Because it was very small back then. There was a
Mm.
big debate whether it was this year's fad, like the Citizens Band radio. I'm probably dating myself with you and others in the audience that don't even remember that, but it was like this monster fad and then just went away. And it was very complicated back then. And as the head of WorldNet, when we launched the AT&T's product in January of 96, our internet product, decided just to have it as a flat rate because there was a metered rate. So if you, for example, today, imagine you go online and we're being charged per minute. That's the way every internet service was, from
Mm-hmm.
AOL to every other one. You were charged per minute while you're online. Well, why don't we just charge, in this case, $20 a month and let people do whatever they want, go on when they want, stay on, surf, and it was so simple that my bill was going to be $20 every month that we went with it, and it did really well. So then when I went to AT&T Wireless, at the time, I was the CEO there. I came out in 97. We launched it in early 98. To me, it was really complicated because if, let's say I was in Seattle, which was where I live, if I was making a local call, it was A cents a minute. Making a long distance call, it was B cents a minute. If I was traveling, let's say I was in New York making a local call, it was C cents a minute. If I was making a long distance call, it was D cents a minute. And then, by the way, if I went to even another city, like a small town in upstate New York, it was all a different rate of minutes. You had no idea what your bill was till the end of the month. So we came out with something called Digital One Rate, which again was, in almost all these cases, I leverage technology. That's what's behind the scenes. That's what makes the innovation possible. It's not just, well, no one thought of making something simple. You couldn't make it simple because you didn't have the capability or wherewithal or technology to make it so that it could be simple for customers. So we launched Digital One Rate in 1998, where, again, it was just a bucket of minutes. You bought a bucket of minutes, this many minutes for $90, this many minutes for $120. And a minute was a minute. Didn't matter who I was calling or where I was. And if you might recall back then, almost all calling when you left your town, nobody took your cell phone with you because it was so expensive to travel with it. You'd go to an airport and there would be a line a mile long at every payphone, lining
Mm-hmm.
up to be able to use the payphone to make a call because no one took their cell phone with them. Or you go to your hotel, use your calling card, you wouldn't use your cell phone. What It completely changed the dynamic. We came out with this, and then all of a sudden, a mobile phone was a mobile device. We did because
Mm-hmm.
the industry was, in essence, penalizing mobility rather than encouraging mobility. And that was our whole business. We just made
Mm-hmm.
it really expensive if you ever moved with it. It was only reasonable if you never moved. So that was the background I had when I got to Sprint, and I've seen this movie before. I
Right.
saw it in the internet. It was
Mm-hmm.
way too complex. I saw it in this case with Digital One Rate. It was 2G. Here we are 10 years later with 3G, with data being added to the mix of complexity for wireless. It's the same movie all over. How can we make it simple? And in all these
Mm-hmm.
cases, we applied technology to the application in a way that's so for our customers, if you will, they didn't see what was behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz.
Yep.
They didn't see that. It was just simple for them. And anyway,
I talk
that's
this
my story.
I love that. I talk about this all the time. I think, especially, I've worked again in both the public and the private sectors, but especially in government, you'll see at the city level too, a lot, they'll throw a lot of money at technology with no idea of how to implement it, not the right staff to implement it, not how to use it. I remember when we built our first open data portal, which was a huge piece of kind of data storytelling in this space. And I said exactly that about the wizard. And someone said, oh, well, if they pull back the curtain, it's not going to be that pretty. I said, the user isn't seeing that, right? The customer experience of what they have when they come here. And I think there is a huge disconnect in what you talk about is a lot of what I see of tech projects living in a basement of an IT department, but can't get it into the hands of the customer. And some of the magic think we found was kind of taking some of those pieces from these IT teams and talking about how we combined all of our efforts to communicate outwardly to the customer and kind of centralizing whether it was reporting an issue through our 311 system of a pothole or through social media or the website or whatever that looked like, this one place, this one touch point for that customer and that citizen experience. And, government, especially in cities, hasn't really figured out how to do this. And so I would always say, look to companies, like yours and other technology groups who do this well. If our resident average age was 32 years old, which it was, and they are paying their bills, in their hand and on their phone and on their device, why would we expect them to come into City Hall and use a credit card or cash payment? I mean, we were just so far behind. So, what advice do you have? Because I think that some of the leadership, the vision, all of the work that you do is like so applicable to so many different industries. Are
Right.
you surprised that, and even beyond like telecom and tech and all this, like, where do you see those opportunities today to kind of bridge that divide, especially when it comes to serving customers or, like I said, citizens in government?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I think the private sector is a great place to learn the way to do it because it is a meritocracy and it is all about speed to market and it's so competitive. Like the government doesn't have a competitor. If it had like right next door, there's the other government, and if we're not ahead of them, if we don't out innovate them, we're gone. So
Mm,
Mitch Daniels was a recent guest of mine, and he was a very successful business executive, for 18 years, and then decided to get into politics. And people said, how were you such a successful governor? He cut the budget, balanced the budget, two-time governor of Indiana.
yep.
He goes, I just applied what I learned in business to government, and then he went to Purdue University and the fastest rising prices in the United States were college tuitions. He froze the tuition for 10 years. And so for 10 years, he tuition and room and board were frozen for his entire period in real dollars, not, inflation adjusted or anything.
Hmm.
And he goes, I just ran both the state of Indiana and then Purdue University as a business. And, it's so that's just what we did. And so could a company keep its prices flat for 10 years? Yeah. If that was an objective, that's what they would just figure out a way to do it. I think culture of innovation, getting back to how you get stuff out of the kind of out of the IT department or out of the lab or what have you. So for example, at Sprint, my leadership team, my direct reports knew that every month I would talk to them and I would ask them, what new product do you have and what new way of doing business have you implemented in your group that you didn't have a month ago? I was always pushing them on new ideas, new nukes. And if I didn't see them, there was a lot of pressure to go back and figure out how to change. Because if you're kind of not changing and improving, you were, in essence, you were moving backwards. And so
Hmm.
my last 2 years, so it was a culture driven by innovation. My last 2 years at Sprint, we were being granted an average of over two U.S. patents, not every year, not every month, not every week, every day. We're
Wow.
being granted an average over two U.S. patents every business day, D-A-Y.
Mm.
So you make it part of the DNA, you make it an objective, you make it part of the culture, and and innovation happens. Just, it's not very complicated.
I agree with you. And the world is changing that quickly. So we have to too. And I always say government shouldn't be an exception to that, and I've never really understood in that space why it lags so far behind. especially when we're delivering services again to citizens or customers or whatever industry you're in. So I think that that's just fascinating.
Yeah,
So,
and I think one problem with government is they don't have a competitor, and
a
that's
great point.
and so it's like you have one government has one hand tied behind its back. And then there are things like, well, I don't, people will take it as political, but for me, it's not. And that is where, whether it's unions that protect jobs, anytime it's not a meritocracy. It's based upon things like seniority. And by the way, I am all for paying good wages, great benefits, a lot of the good things that unions do. I also see the bad things they do, like protect poor performers and
Hmm.
keep and resist change. Lots of organizations resist change. Unions, we could talk about education. I don't want to get off in other ways, but they just resist change. In government, you can get away with resisting change. Businesses that resist change, they can, but then they go out of business. They're gone. They're just boom.
Hmm.
And that solves it, if you will. Darwin solves it for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you're exactly right. I worked with 40-year employees, some of them who, and I've had people say to me, well, I can't make any change in my organization until someone dies or retires. And that was really shocking coming from a world that I came from when the TV industry in New York City, where, like you said, if I didn't have a new idea to bring to the table, someone would set a box on my desk and I'm out of work. And so I think that was shocking to me. And you're exactly right. The reason why change isn't happening because there's no competitor in the market. There's no push and desire. But then we wonder how we attract this next generation of leaders into this space, whether it's to run for office or take these jobs. I mean, that's something I think a lot about. And if there's no place for them or they don't see themselves in these spaces, that's really problematic too. So I'd love to know from you, seeing all the changes in the world, tell me about the part that social media played for you and is now playing in this world of storytelling and getting information out and that customer experience as well.
Well, social media is a multifaceted, sword, if you will. Of course, social media at the time, shortly after we launched, simply everything. If you go back to that time, 2008, 2009, that's really when social media, especially the first big one was Facebook, that really
Mm-hmm.
kind of took off. And of course, there's been so much since then. And that has really increased the usage of these devices. And some would say it has, people have different points of view of what that's meant for the development of young people, whether it's been a positive or a negative.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, there's a lot more communication, and it has really changed it from a one to many to a many to many form of communication where people are getting so much of their communication just from other people. I tend to be one that is more critical of social media because its lack of curation and fact checking, and also just how much just junk there is out there. Like I could care less. Like one of the reasons I stopped going on Facebook is people are saying, "Hey, I'm at the grocery store," or "I'm out doing this or whatever." I'm like, I don't care. Hey, if you win a gold
Yeah.
medal or you win the Nobel Prize, tell me about it.
Yeah.
But if I'm just out, doing whatever, my typical boring life, I'm not interested in your boring, uneventful, everyday life. To me, that's not
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I want
Yeah.
things curated to be something that is actually worth knowing. And of course, what's happened in terms of so much else, people are not getting their information from a source that is either knowledgeable, educated, thoughtful, or most importantly of all, just fact checks. And there's
Mm-hmm.
just so much disinformation out there. And I don't know what the solution is. I think kind of as you will, like, the cat's out of the bag. It is what it is. I don't know if we'll ever get the genie back in the bottle to where we're all working from the same set of facts. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big social media fan for that reason. I think we've seen it play out in the last few elections where people are in these arguments and they're not arguing different points of view from a known set of facts. People actually, as who was it, Kellyanne Conway or whatever said, well, we have alternative facts, and now that's become accepted. It's just your
Mm-hmm.
facts or whatever you believe. That's a lot of that is social media. So I'm probably the last person or the wrong person to answer in that regard. And one of the other reasons I'm a little concerned about it, personally am a big fan of AI. I think AI is a really good thing unless it's poorly trained or educated. And AI models don't know the difference when they're scraping information off the web, whether it's true or not, because so
Mm.
much stuff on the web is not true at all. It's completely
Yep.
false. And so, how do we, basically, how do we determine fact from fiction, right and wrong? But one of the things in education, in terms of where things are going, and I actually asked Mitch this on a recent interview, is they say, well, like when the calculator came along, do you need to learn math anymore? Because, I have calculators that could do it for me. I don't really need to learn to add, subtract, multiply, divide. Now that, AI can write memos and notes and letters and even my texts for me, do I really need to learn to read and write very well? I personally think the answer is absolutely yes,
Hmm.
because no matter how good these models are, the additional, we'll call it human piece at the end. So, for example, I think that you could say to an AI model, write me a speech or a paper about A, B, or C. But then that's just a draft. Where the person adds real value is they come in and they improve it, they put it in their own voice, all of those other things that come, and you have to actually have, you never lose those skills, really good writing skills. Now, I may be wrong, but I think I personally, I write better than anything I've ever read on AI. I have
Mm.
better grammar, better organization in terms of how I organize a sentence, in terms of its theme and how and all those kinds of things. And I think my high school English teachers for that.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned that people will believe they don't have to focus as much on
Mm.
education going forward, because I think, by the way, once AI is better than you, then you don't have a job. Then you are irrelevant. You have to work
Mm.
really hard to always be smarter and better than anything AI can do. And I think that's
Mm.
a form of competition. And I mean that in a good way, getting back to our earlier conversation about the advantage of competition, always keeping you working harder. I think AI is going to force people to work harder, to be smarter and more creative, and to be better than anything someone can replicate in some model. It's a form of
Mm.
competition, and I think that's a very good thing in my view.
Absolutely. I think you're so right about that authentic voice that just isn't there. It's a tool, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
new tool that helps us to be better and think differently. And I'm with you. I love it when applied correctly, but I couldn't agree more. And I think raising two teenage daughters right now, it's fascinating to kind of watch how they're looking at this new technology and how they use social media and just how different that is. I just read a study that said that students, teenagers are spending a fourth of their day on their phones, even in school, like during the school day. And in some ways, they use it as a tool, like you said, like a calculator to help them, research and find information and connect with other people. And there are positives to that. But where's that fine line between what you bring to the table and that human voice and that human element? And then how do we continue to move forward by embracing these technologies and continuing to value learning in the way we've always done it. So if you kind of look ahead or were telling your kids, today or your grandchild, what would you say in the future, the next 5 to 10 years, maybe not even just in the telecom industry, but in general about the types of skills and the skill sets that we'll need? What would you be writing on your napkin today, like looking into the future now?
Well, critical thinking is extremely important. Being able to listen to many points of view and synthesize it, or data, and being able to think critically and coming out with good decisions. I think teamwork, the ability to work really well with others. I think related to that is empathy. I think that will never change. We'll call it things that make us special and different as people, and being and being effective. And all of those things are critical elements of being a good leader, because that's something that will never go out of style. We will
Mm.
always be looking for leaders, whether it's a leader of a small team, whether it's just the leader of a family, whether it's the leader of a mid-sized team or a large team or a country or a company. And, I'm thinking mainly in terms of my sons. They're in their late 20s. They're embarking on a career, careers, both of them right now. I tell them, take risks, try things now, work hard, learn everything you possibly can, but be authentic and learn to be a great leader of people, because that'll never go out of style, and it's always going to be needed and required.
And maybe now more than ever. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thank you, Dan. It's been such a pleasure to have you and have this conversation. I'm truly honored and so grateful that you took the time out of your schedule to talk with me. And I know my listeners are going to learn so much from you, and also should tune into your podcast as well, which I'm a big fan of, and a big fan of you and all you've done in your career. So thank you again for taking the time to share your insights with me today.
Dana, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.